Welcome back to Orange County's Real Estate Hot 30. I am Lina Fayyad, and next to me,
I'm Holly McDonald.
welcome back, guys, to our podcast. I hope you're doing well with everything going on. So today's topic, we're going to talk about land leases. Or leased lands. We're getting a lot of inquiries from buyers, whether online, through our lead generation websites, and a lot of them are finding homes with great prices, but the only downfall they're not aware of is that there's a land lease fee. So with that said, let's talk about what they are, the pros and cons about them, and tips and tricks to see if you qualify and if it's the right fit for you. So Holly, I wanted to talk about land leases, knowing that they're very common, and let's just start with the definition of a land lease. Go ahead.
So basically a land lease is when you have the right to own a property, but you do not own the land that it sits on. So what we see in our area is there are a number of complexes throughout Costa Mesa, Newport, Huntington Beach, Santa Ana, where you can own an individual condo, townhome, manufactured home, and you'll have a normal HOA, but you're also going to have a land lease fee that is payable to the person who owns the land. It's not necessarily the association. It's not necessarily the condo owners. So that being said, a lot of people are not familiar with this, especially if they're, a first-time buyer or they're not from the area. They've never come across this before. But we see it all the time. It's very common that people will submit, like Lina said, because they're interested in a property that it seems too good to be true almost. And unfortunately, it may be too good to be true if you don't understand what a land lease is. And, it may not be something that ultimately works for you.
Okay, so basically land leases are homes. For example, we live in Orange County, and Orange County is its own bubble. So there's certain homes, like for example, in Newport Beach, that I got an inquiry about. I think we both got that one. And it was like, a house in Newport for 400,000. So and it's not written online for these buyers that there is a land lease. They'll write the HOA amount, but they will not insert, on Zillow and Redfin, all of that it's on a land lease. At least I haven't seen it myself.
There are certain ways on some of the websites to look through the additional information and see that it is on leased land, but it can be very confusing. It can be very buried. It's not necessarily something that realtors are excited to promote because it does bring up a lot of questions, and a lot of people may have they may have fears or they may have hesitations about looking at land leases just because they don't understand them. But our goal here is to try to give you a little bit of education about what they are, so that way if you come across them, at least you have a basic understanding of what they are and you know what questions to ask your realtor. Some land leases are, if you know the right questions, it may be a good opportunity for you. But if you don't know what the questions to ask are, and you don't know why you're asking them, they could obviously not work out well for you.
So when you buy a house or a condo on leased land, you're able to take out a mortgage on the property as usual, but the mortgage payment is a bit less because of the land lease payment. Am I correct?
Pretty much. So yes, you are typically, not all land leases can be financed. Let me start out by saying that, but most of them can in our area. So that means, like Lina said, you can get a financing for your mortgage, and then of course you would still be responsible for your HOA. The extra thing though is that you're also going to be, you're also going to have to pay for a land lease fee each month or each quarter, however it's structured. And keep this in mind when you are getting qualified for your loan for any property that has an HOA, a homeowners association or whatnot. The lender has to make sure that you can qualify for that monthly payment. So your mortgage, your association, your taxes, insurance. If there's a land lease, you also still have to qualify to be able to afford that land lease payment. And if it's a few $100s per month, that may knock you out from being able to qualify for it.
I mean, I've seen land leases of almost $2,000 a month. That's like another rent payment.
Yeah. In Newport Beach, there are quite a few manufactured home communities where, yes, you will see a very low price tag. It will get you excited, especially if you're not aware that there, could be a land lease. And then when you really dig down and find out, what's going on, yes, you may have a $2,400 a month land lease fee. You may have a $4,500 a month land lease fee to be right on the water, which, you have to consider. If you were renting a home right on the water, you might be paying 10 grand a month just to live there anyway. So the land lease fee is, it is kind of in line with what the prices in the area are, but you have to be aware of it to understand why a property is priced so low. Because when you tack on all these fees, you're ultimately going to be paying about what you would be to rent or purchase another home that just costs more.
Yeah, and I mean, these land leases, I've seen 30, 50 years. I mean, I was just saw one online for like almost 100 years. I couldn't believe it. It's like, so they really vary. So, I mean, usually, so the house is cheaper, but then you're able to buy a house, I mean, that you typically wouldn't have been able to buy in that, neighborhood or specific zip code, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that you could qualify to purchase a home with a lower purchase price and still be able to afford all of these extra fees. But, when you're putting 10% down on 400,000, it's a lot lower of an amount than putting 10% down on a $3 million house, which, that might be what the neighborhood is commanding if you're, on the peninsula or something. So there are benefits and there are reasons why people do consider them, but but at the end of the day, your monthly payment still might be $7,000 a month to live there. So you're not going to escape the fact that it is pricey to live in certain areas. Even in Costa Mesa, there are some land leases over by South Coast Plaza that we've gotten tons of inquiries about, and I've sold several in there. And, you will see a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath townhome for, 1,500 square feet, which would normally cost you, let's say, $600,000 if you didn't have a land lease. But because of the land lease, they're only asking $450,000. So obviously people are going to be excited about a $450,000 price tag when they know that, normally they would be spending 150 grand more for that same type of property. But then when they find out, okay, here's the things, I've got to pay for an association, I still have to pay for my land lease. And the real kicker, like Lina just said, the land lease terms vary. They're all different. It depends on who owns the land. It depends on how they drew up the lease. Some have been drafted a long time ago and they're running out of time. Some have been renewed recently, so they have 50 years left on them. Some locally have less than 30 years left on it. And this is a key point here. One thing you definitely want to take into consideration, when your land lease term is less than 30 years, because lenders typically do a 30-year loan term, and that's what most buyers look at getting, a 30-year loan. If the land lease is shorter than that, you cannot get a 30-year loan. The lender is going to insist that your loan be shorter than that 30 years because they want to make sure that if you're there for 30 years, they're going to be paid each month for those 30 years. So if the land lease cuts out in 20 years, what happens for years 20 to 30? Because with the land leases, one thing you want to ask about is what happens at the end of the lease.
I was just going to ask you that. Like, what if a buyer gets a home and, you got 5 or 10 years left and they're excited because then, the price of the home might change. So elaborate, please. Tell me.
There's several different ways that it can play out. And that's, again, this is question number 2. So question number 1 is, I forgot. We're going to have to cut this part. What was question?
It's okay. What are the pros of having the land lease and trying to get a mortgage?
I'm ready.
Yes.
Question number 1, how much time is left on the land lease? Question number 2, what happens when the land lease is up? So there's different scenarios and, they can all play out differently. Some of the most common ones are that 1, the land lease gets extended. That doesn't necessarily mean it will be the same price for that extension. The terms can change just like your regular lease can change when you renew it, but a lot of them do get extended. Another option is that they might allow whoever owns their townhome, their condo, their manufactured home, they might allow them to buy out the land lease, meaning that they can pay extra money or finance extra money to purchase the land and then, own it like a normal condo or townhome would be owned. Another option that we have seen, not very commonly, but it does happen, is the owners of the land, they have the right to sell it. So if they decide, hey, I want to sell the land when this lease is up, and they give proper notice, they may have to pay you fair market value so that you will move, and then they can, demolish the community, or, construct something new, or convert it. I don't know, there's so many different things they could do. There's just a lot of options. And so you really want to know what those potential options could be. And I will warn you that a lot of times, if it's far out in the future, if it's 20 years out, 30 years out, it's probably undetermined. So there is a little bit of a risk factor if you don't know. So you have to really, weigh the pros and cons on, am I going to be there for 20 years, or, is it going to be harder for me to sell in 10 years? There are unknowns.
How would the equity work on this, since it's not really on your land?
You can still make equity on it. I've seen a lot of families that have purchased in the last couple of years at different land lease communities. And in general, if the land lease term is still has a good amount of time left on it, and the price of the units is still a good value for the area, they're still going up in value if the rest of the areas are going up. So like a case study in Costa Mesa, there was a unit that I sold a couple of years ago for around $360. And, in those 3 years, obviously, the term of the land lease has gotten shorter. So maybe it was like 25 years 3 years ago, and now it's 22 years left on the land lease. But in the last 3 years, appreciation around town has gone up too. So, at 360 3 years ago, now it just recently resold for 400. So they still came out ahead. They still made money. Maybe they would have made more if they didn't own a land lease, but but they probably did fine because they still came out ahead.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So, another thing I was reading about, I personally, all the leads I get with land leases, buyers start running the other way. And I'm like, hold on, we can still find you the home you're looking for. But, I think one pro thing, is it true that you avoid property taxes since you don't really own the land? You're not held responsible for the tax on that?
That is such a good question. Thank you for bringing that up. No, not necessarily.
No, okay. I was just wondering myself, I would need to get educated myself.
It's a fair question. And actually that is question number 3. Are property taxes, necessary? I know that in a lot of the ones that I have sold, yes, you are still responsible for property taxes, which yes, it does feel like it's double dipping, but there are different complexes where you may not have them, but I would say more often than not, yes, you are still going to pay property taxes. And I know that's a bummer.
Yeah. Just wondering. So basically it's really trying to get find a lender that will qualify you and get you approved for land leases. We work with great lenders, but they have to start shopping for that. Basically, that's the first rule before really trying to, because you have to qualify through these land leases and communities.
Yes, that's a very good point. I would say that would be like point 4, but you're probably, you're right. Actually, that should come right at the very beginning. If you are considering a land lease, you definitely want to see if your lender even, can loan on those. Some do not. There are some that do, and we can definitely point you in the right direction, but some lenders are just not familiar with it, or they're not comfortable lending there. And, again, from the very beginning, Lina and I have encountered this, unfortunately. Even though a lender may say that they're, okay to do a land lease, unfortunately, since it's not the most common form, they can get confused about things too. And unfortunately, we have seen buyers that have been, in a bad position because the lender didn't calculate in the land lease fee. And like I was saying earlier, you have to qualify to be able to show that you can afford that, because no lender wants to give you money to buy a place if they know you're going to default on the payment that's due for the land lease. So you have to prove that you can afford the whole monthly payment. And unfortunately, we do know of some buyers that have gotten stung in the end because they've gone all the way through the process, and then the lender says, oops, we didn't calculate that $400 a month fee, and now you don't qualify.
Wow. Yeah, so that's definitely a pinpoint. You got to make sure they can fund you towards the end when it comes to closing. Very interesting. So do you have you got cash buyers for land leases? Have you seen such?
Yeah, okay. A lot of cash buyers do. If it pencils out financially, and you're paying cash, and all you're responsible for is a land lease fee, an HOA, and property taxes. If you're paying cash and you feel like the property is going to go up in value and it's a very rentable unit where you're going to get a good rent and good tenants, it can pencil out. And I have seen a lot of investors buy them, but it really depends on the land lease and the terms. And obviously, just like any property that somebody might want to buy as an investment, you have to make sure you know what the rules are for the association regarding rentals. You have to make sure that they're, first of all, going to allow rentals. Find out if they allow, is it 1 year rentals, 30-day rentals, short-term rentals. You need to know what those terms are. Unfortunately, this is, I don't want to confuse people, but if there are too many renters in a community, it can hurt the community as far as other people being able to buy there to live there for financing purposes. So, if we need to make sure the ratios are good, and lenders are going to look at that. So it all kind of plays in, but yeah.
So for example, let's, what happens when a buyer who is in a leased home or a seller who wants to sell, they have to sell to someone who qualifies through the program, I'm assuming, and has to follow the same, since it's still, in the land lease time period.
Yeah. So here's the thing. When you're selling a property that has a land lease, it is very important that your agent really vet out the buyers and confirm that their lender is confident that they can do the land lease. There's a lot of instances where lenders will ask upfront there's actually a land lease document. Just like we get HOA documents when you're purchasing for an HOA, there's a whole separate land lease document too, so that they can review that and see what the terms of the land lease are to make sure that they're comfortable lending there. As much as possible, you want to provide as much as you can to hopefully mitigate there being issues down the road with the buyer not qualifying.
Absolutely. So what should we tell our buyers who get super excited and see all these homes and, ding us every time there's a too good to be true home on the market? I usually tell them it is. And then the first word they say, is it a land lease? I'm like, yep. Yeah. So what do you recommend? What do you suggest? I know there's all these calculators online that you also told me don't use them. They're not accurate.
Yeah, so definitely, I think it's important for people to know that when you're going on websites that are out there and can calculate what your mortgage payment per month is going to be, I know a lot of buyers shop like this because, of course, we're all trying to live in a budget. The calculators are not going to add in a land lease fee. They're just going to do the bare bones. You're lucky they even do the HOA half the time. So the land lease fee is going to be on top of whatever that total payment is. So your payment could easily go from $3,000 a month to $3,400 a month. And in the grand scheme of things, that is a big deal. And so here's the thing. If you could afford that, but you're not so keen on the land lease because, maybe you're hesitant or you feel like there's a risk or there's, it's just too much for you to handle, you could consider what that extra few $100s a month would do to increase your budget, your overall budget, and purchase a property that doesn't have a land lease. And it may not be in the same city that you're looking in. For instance, unfortunately, Newport Beach, if your budget is $400,000, you're not going to really find anything else here right now. But if you're open to other areas nearby, perhaps Tustin, Orange, Lake Forest, Garden Grove, there are going to be other options. And so allow us to expand your horizons and show you what's out there and educate you, because there is a reality check when you start to look for a home. Everybody faces it because there's a lot of stuff out there that does appear too good to be true, and we have to help you understand what the reality is.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad we're making this video. I'm gonna post it up and send it to all those land lease clients that are just waiting for a better price. I'm like, that's not real, guys.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing too. I know a lot of buyers are going to think that maybe they have a little bit more of a buyer's edge purchasing a land lease because, these things are going to be, more challenging to sell. And the truth is, yes, in general, those properties will probably sit on the market a little bit longer unless they're priced, to move right away. It does take a little bit more time to educate people and get them on board with it. But I can tell you they do get a lot of showings. So sellers, be ready for showings. You're going to be showing your home to people that are not going to totally understand a land lease, and but you gotta wait for that right one to come along. It's part of the game. And then as far as being a buyer goes, you need to also just be open to what we're sharing with you and let us help you figure out what you can get, where you can get it, and what the pros and cons are.
Absolutely. I mean, there are pros, there are cons, it's they're very common, land leases. So they're part of our daily lives. So I wouldn't say you should, people should run away, but you're definitely right. I'm glad we are educating buyers out there. So you guys heard it right here. Would you like to add anything else? So we talked about how much time. The second part was when the land lease ends. Property taxes and HOAs, factoring in your land lease amount with your lender. What else?
I would just say, so for the most part, what I see with people that do purchase land leases, it is because they're set on a specific area. So if they're dead set on being, like, let's say in Costa Mesa, because they grew up here, they're, fond of all of the activities and everything that you can do here, the dining, the South Coast Plaza, being close to the beach, all that. They're still going to be open to purchasing it because real estate's about location, right? So I have had clients that have been not, maybe a little bit wary of land leases because they don't get them. And they do say, okay, I'm open to looking at Santa Ana, Garden Grove, and, maybe seeing how far my money will go there. But then when it comes down to it, if their heart is set on being in Costa Mesa, where they've got like their root system, then they will be open to it. But I think it's so important that people understand what it is and all of the little things that go into it that make it different, because not even so much for purchasing it. Of course you want to know what you're buying. I mean, that's very important, but it's also a huge thing for when you're selling it, because at the end of the day, it could be more challenging to sell. And I have seen people that have purchased and then a few years later, they don't understand why it's harder to sell down the road. And, it may be harder to sell because as the land lease term gets shorter, it may be harder for people to obtain financing. There will come a point where you might not be able to finance. And there are communities in Santa Ana where it's cash only. And, what that means is when it's cash only, your buyer pool is way more limited. You don't have all the people getting loans coming to look at your house. So I think it's important to just know, as much as you can about the pros and cons and make the best decision possible.
Absolutely. This is really informative. I'm so glad we did this podcast. Well, I think these are all kind of my questions. I learned something new today.
Like I said, they do move, but it takes buyers who understand what it is. And if they're too weird, let's put it this way, when people are hesitant and worried and, because they don't understand something about the market, they tend to just, turn the light off and not even look over there again. But if they have some sort of understanding, they might at least be open to it. And that would be great for sellers. And it might actually be great for the buyer too. But again, you have to weigh the pros and cons. And I know some people are turned off because, it's different. And it is.
And it's different, and it probably takes a little bit more steps than, a regular purchase of a home. So, well, you guys heard it right here at Orange County's Real Estate Hot 30. I'm Lina Fayyad.
I'm Holly McDonald.
And we will see you next week. Like, subscribe. If you have any questions about land leases, home purchasing, investing, buying, selling, we are your girls. So reach out, call us, comment, text us. We're ready. We'll see you next week.
See you next time.